My name is Ava Thompson, and I'm 28 years old, living a life that's more about the hustle than the harmony lately. 4 weeks ago, my parents decided to play a high stakes game with our family legacy. They sold my grandmother's heirloom 1892 Steinway antique piano, the one she'd personally promised would be passed down to me the moment I mastered my first Bach concerto. They used all $95,000 from that sale to buy my sister Madison a brand new, top of the line silver Mercedes Benz. They banked on the assumption that Grandma Evelyn was too tethered to her hospice bed and clouded by meds to ever find out her legacy had been traded for a luxury car. They thought I was too passive, too much of a people pleaser, to ever tell her the cold, hard truth. They were wrong. Dead wrong. When I finally found the nerve to sit by her bedside and whisper what they'd done, Grandma Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't have a meltdown or scream at the ceiling. She simply reached for her iPhone on the nightstand with a steady hand, dialed one number, and said 7 words that would effectively nuclear bomb everything my parents thought they owned. Before I tell you what those 7 words were, and the absolute wreckage that went down at my mother's 60th birthday party, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment and let me know your city and what the local time is. Now, let me take you back to the day it all started. The gloomy Tuesday afternoon my grandmother was admitted to hospice. The call came right as I was packing up my sheet music after my final private lesson of the day in a drafty studio downtown. "Evelyn's had another heart attack," my father said. No greeting, no, "How was your day, Ava?" Just that clipped, executive tone he uses for closing deals. "She's stable, but they're moving her to hospice. Family meeting at the Presbyterian Hospital in an hour. Don't be late." I dropped everything. The heavy thud of my piano books hitting the floor, echoing the weight in my chest. By the time I arrived, my parents and my sister Madison were already clustered in a corner of the sterile waiting room, huddled like they were discussing a hostile takeover. My father, Rich Thompson, stood with his arms crossed over his tailored charcoal suit, looking more inconvenienced than heartbroken. My mother, Diane, clutched her designer leather tote like a lifeline, her eyes darting around the room as if checking if anyone from her country club was watching us in such a depressing place. And Madison, 4 years younger, always the golden child of the Thompson household, was scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up from what looked like a Pinterest board for luxury car accessories. "Good, you're here," my father said, checking his Rolex. "We need to delegate the logistics." Not, "How are you holding up, Ava?" Not, "I know how much she means to you." Just cold, hard operations. "Someone needs to be on site with her daily," he continued. "Diane and I have the consulting firm to run, and we've got several high-profile clients in town this month. Madison's in a critical phase with the Harrison family." Daniel Harrison, Madison's boyfriend of 8 months, and the son of my father's most lucrative business partner. "So, Ava," my father looked at me like he was assigning a tedious data entry task to a junior intern. "You'll handle the visits. Your schedule is flexible. Let's be honest, teaching scales to toddlers doesn't exactly require you to be on the clock 40 hours a week." I wanted to say that I taught music to 37 children every week, that I ran intensive after-school programs in underfunded districts, that my time had professional value too. but I didn't. Of course, I said quietly, swallowing the lump of resentment. I want to be with her anyway. Perfect. My father was already turning away, already back on his phone checking the S&P 500. Keep us updated if anything major changes. As I walked toward Grandma Evelyn's room, the smell of antiseptic and industrial floor wax filling my lungs, I heard my mother's voice cut through the quiet hallway, a sharp whisper meant only for Madison. At least she's useful for something. I kept walking. I didn't turn around, not because I didn't hear, but because I'd spent 28 years becoming a master at absorbing that specific kind of American suburban cruelty. I'd stopped expecting my existence to be valued as anything more than a convenience for their superior lives. Grandma Evelyn's room smelled like lavender and old books, a small rebellion against the clinical scent of the facility. She insisted on both. They try to make everything smell like bleach and bad news, she told me on my first visit. I refuse. If I'm going to cross the finish line, I'll do it surrounded by things I love. She was 76, sharp as a switchblade, and dying of congestive heart failure. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe a month or two if she was lucky. I visited every day after my last student packed up their metronome. We talked about music, about her years performing in the great concert halls of the East Coast, about my students who couldn't yet read notes but already felt the soul of the rhythm in their bones. One evening, as the sun set over the Philadelphia skyline outside her window, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than I remembered, but her eyes were fierce, glowing with an intensity that the morphine couldn't touch. Ava, I need you to know something. I need you to hear this clearly. Anything, Grandma? The Steinway. She paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. My mother's piano. The one from 1892. The soul of this family. I knew it well. I'd learned my first scales on those genuine ivory keys when I was 7 years old. That piano had been the soundtrack of my childhood, the only place in the Thompson family dynamic where I felt truly seen, where I wasn't just the quiet daughter, but an artist in the making. It's yours, she said firmly. I've already told Rich and Diane. Told them last month in front of everyone at that overpriced steakhouse dinner. That piano belongs to you, and I expect you to play it until the keys wear out. I remembered that conversation, my father's jaw tightening like a vice, my mother exchanging a sharp, calculating look with Madison, my sister rolling her eyes and muttering something about vintage dust collectors. Grandma, you don't have to. I want to. She squeezed my hand, her knuckles white. You're the only one who understands what it means. The others see a price tag. You see the music. Promise me you'll take care of it. I promise. She smiled then, a knowing smile that seemed to hold legal and personal secrets I couldn't yet see. There are some things in this country more valuable than a bank balance, child, and some people who desperately need to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Grandma had asked me to bring some old photographs from her house. Pictures of her performing days, the black and white shots of her at the height of her career. Images she wanted to see one last time. I still had a key, so I drove over after school on a rainy, humid Thursday afternoon. The house was quiet, too quiet. The usual grandeur of the foyer felt hollow. I walked through the formal foyer, past the dining room, and into the living room where the Steinway had stood for 30 years. The floorboards didn't groan the way they used to. The space was empty. I stopped breathing. The air left my lungs in one sharp gasp. Where the piano should have been, there was nothing but a rectangular indent in the deep pile carpet. A dusty ghost of a masterpiece that had lived there for decades, now stripped away like a piece of common junk. My hands were shaking violently as I pulled out my phone. "Mom?" My voice cracked, sounding small against the silence of the empty house. "Where's Grandma's piano?" A pause, then my mother's voice, casual and breezy, as if she were talking about a grocery list. "Rich handled it. Adult matters, Ava. You don't need to stress your little head over it." "Handled it? How? Where is it?" "I said, don't worry about it, Ava. I have a Pilates class starting. Bye." Click. She hung up on me, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my grandmother's legacy. I stood in that empty living room for what felt like hours, the silence of the house amplified by the lack of the piano's soul. I stared at the indent in the carpet, a permanent scar on the floorboards that marked 30 years of history. The rain pattered against the windows, a rhythmic, dull thumping that matched the frantic beating of my heart. Somewhere in the distance, over the mainline suburbs, thunder rolled, heavy and ominous like a judgment. I drove to my parents' sprawling colonial-style house that evening, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I navigated through the rain-slicked streets of the high-end neighborhood. My father answered the door with a heavy crystal glass of expensive single-malt scotch in his hand, looking utterly annoyed at the interruption of his evening news cycle. "The piano," I said, my voice trembling but reaching for a frequency of strength I didn't know I had. "What did you do with it, Dad?" He didn't even flinch, taking a slow, methodical sip of his drink, as if he were contemplating a stock trade rather than a family betrayal. "Sold it. Got $95,000 for it. Good price, all things considered. The market for antiques is volatile, Ava. You have to strike while the iron is hot." The world tilted on its axis. "You sold it? Grandma said it was mine. She told you that to your face." "Grandma's dying, Ava. Let's not romanticize the situation." He took another sip of his drink, the ice clinking against the glass like a funeral knell. "She doesn't need a piano in a hospice ward. And neither do you. You're barely making rent in that studio apartment. Where would you even put a 7-foot grand?" Behind him, I heard the jingle of car keys, that specific, heavy metallic sound of luxury. Madison appeared in the hallway, her face glowing with the kind of artificial radiance that only comes from getting exactly what you want. "New keys for a new car," she chirped, swinging the Mercedes fob like a weaponized accessory. "You bought her a car?" My voice was flat, drained of everything but pure, unadulterated shock. "With Grandma's piano, with my inheritance." My father shrugged like I'd asked about the local weather forecast. "Mercedes-Benz GLC. Madison needs to make the right impression on the Harrisons. In that social circle, Appearances aren't just vanity, they're currency. Daniel's family is extremely particular about the status of the people they associate with. That piano was supposed to be mine, I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. And what would you do with it? My mother appeared behind my father, arms crossed tightly over her cashmere sweater. You teach intro to music to toddlers, Ava. You don't perform at the Kimmel Center. You don't have the space, and frankly, you don't have the professional trajectory to justify owning an instrument of that caliber. Madison needed that capital for her future. She's building a life, not a hobby. Her future. I repeated the words, tasting their metallic bitterness. Madison sauntered into the foyer, swinging her new keys like a trophy she'd won in a bloodless coup. Don't be jealous, Ava. It's not a good look on someone your age. She smiled, showing off her perfectly veneered teeth. Maybe if you'd picked a lucrative career, something that actually contributes to the GDP, you could afford nice things too. Living the starving artist life was your choice. I looked at my parents, at my sister, at the carefully curated high-gloss life they'd built, where I was always the budgetary afterthought, always the one whose needs came last in the family audit. Does Grandma know? Silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence you find in a courtroom before a sentence is read. Does she know you liquidated her piano? My mother's face hardened, her features shifting into a mask of cold, maternal authority. She's in hospice, Ava. She's on high-dose morphine half the time. She's drifting in and out of reality. She doesn't need to know anything that might disrupt her final days. You mean you don't want her to know because you've committed a crime against her wishes? I countered. I mean, my mother stepped closer. Her perfume, something expensive and floral, cloying and suffocating. Her voice dropped to something cold and threatening, the kind of tone she used to use to keep me quiet as a child. That if you tell her and it causes her cardiac stress and something happens, if she slips away because of the shock, that will be on you. Do you want to be the one responsible for killing your grandmother over a piece of furniture? The accusation hung in the air like toxic fumes. I should have backed down. The old Ava, the one who accepted the crumbs of their affection, would have. But something had shifted inside me. The music had stopped, and for the first time, I could see the players for who they really were. Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property, I said, my voice finally steady. And I won't lie to her just to protect your reputation. I turned and walked out before they could respond, the heavy oak door thudding shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment felt smaller than usual, a modest one-bedroom in a walk-up building that my parents had always mocked as a temporary pit stop for someone with no ambition. I sat on my second-hand couch, staring at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. Grandma Evelyn, at her final concert 20 years ago. Her fingers poised above the keys, her face luminous with divine purpose. That same piano, the one they'd sold like it was a used IKEA desk. My mother's words circled in my head like vultures. If something happens, that will be on you. Was she right? If I told Grandma, would the shock be the final blow to her heart? Would I be causing more pain in her final days just to satisfy my own sense of justice? But then I remembered what Grandma had always taught me when I was struggling with a difficult sonata. Truth can wound, she'd said once when I was 12 and terrified to admit I'd failed a math test. But lies always wound deeper. They just take longer to rot the soul. I pulled my knees to my chest and thought about the last 28 years. Every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the fragile peace of the Thompson dinner table. Every time I'd accepted less because fighting felt exhausting and futile. Every time I'd made myself smaller so my family could feel grand and powerful. And where had it gotten me? Here, alone, invisible. Watching them erase Grandma Evelyn's legacy like her words meant nothing in the face of a German-engineered SUV. If I stayed silent now, I wasn't keeping peace. I was signing off on their theft. I was becoming complicit in the erasure of the only person who ever truly loved me. By 3 o'clock in the morning, watching the blue light of the street lamps filter through my blinds, I'd made my decision. Grandma deserved the truth. She deserved to know that her son had robbed her, lied to her, and assumed she was too mentally diminished to matter anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I deserve to stop apologizing for taking up space in this family. I set my alarm for early morning. I would go to hospice before my first morning student arrived. I would tell her everything, no matter the cost. Grandma was awake when I arrived at the hospice facility the next morning, the pale dawn light filtering through the blinds and casting long skeletal shadows across the linoleum floor. She was propped up against her pillows, watching the sunrise over the distant skyline with a quiet, unyielding focus. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator was the only sound in the room, a mechanical pulse keeping time with her fading strength. "You look like you haven't slept, Ava," she said softly, her voice raspy but her mind clearly firing on all cylinders. "I haven't." I pulled a heavy vinyl chair close to her bed and took her hand. It felt like parchment, dry and fragile. "Grandma Evelyn, I have to tell you something, and I know it's going to be a jagged pill to swallow." Her eyes, still sharp and observant despite everything, studied my face like she was reading a complex musical score. "Then tell me. Don't sugarcoat it, Ava. I've lived too long for euphemisms." So I did. I laid it all out with the clinical precision of a post-mortem. The empty space in her living room where the music used to live. The $95,000 transaction. The silver Mercedes-Benz parked in my parents' driveway as a trophy for Madison's bright future. My father's casual dismissal of her wishes as adult matters. My mother's vile threat to blame me for her death if I dared to speak the truth. I told her all of it, bracing myself for tears, for a sudden spike in her heart rate, or the kind of devastation that might break what was left of her fragile heart. Instead, Grandma Evelyn let out a long, slow breath. Not a gasp of pain, not a cry of betrayal, but a sigh. It was the sigh of a veteran who had finally seen the enemy reveal their ultimate position. "Grandma," I whispered, my own voice shaking with a guilt I shouldn't have been carrying. She turned to look at me, and her expression wasn't grief-stricken. It was calm, almost resigned, with the cold, calculated clarity of a grandmaster who had anticipated every move on the board. I knew this might happen, sweetheart. I'd hoped for better, but I'd planned for the worst. You knew? I know the man my son chose to become. Her voice was steady, anchored by a lifetime of hard truths. I've watched him prioritize the shallow over the substantial for 40 years. I hoped he'd change, but in business and in life, hope isn't a strategy. I prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't. My mind raced, trying to catch up to the gears I could see turning behind her eyes. Prepared how? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached toward her bedside table with a determined grace. Hand me my iPhone, would you? The one with the leather case? I passed it to her, confused. She scrolled through her contacts with surprising dexterity, found a name, and pressed call. Then she put it on speaker. 3 rings. Then a man's voice, deep, measured, and carrying the unmistakable authority of a seasoned litigator. Evelyn, how are you feeling this morning? I'm dying, Hal. Let's not waste time on pleasantries. But I'm clear-headed, my faculties are intact, and it's time. I understand. My team is ready. When? Sunday. Diane's 60th birthday party. At my house. I want the presentation to be as public as the betrayal. I'll prepare the final documents. I'll see you then, old friend. Thank you, Hal. She ended the call and looked at me with a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. Grandma. I stared at her, the pieces of a much larger puzzle starting to click into place. Who is Hal? Hal Sterling. She set the phone down gently. He's been my attorney for 30 years. He was your grandfather's closest confidant and the sharpest legal mind in the tri-state area. You have your own attorney? Dad always said he handled all your estate planning. Rich assumes he understands everything about my affairs because he assumes I'm as transparent as he is, Ava. Her eyes twinkled despite the exhaustion etched into her face. He's always equated my silence with ignorance. It's been his greatest tactical weakness for decades. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something vast, looking down into depths I couldn't see. What's happening on Sunday at Mom's birthday party? Justice, Ava. Pure, unadulterated American justice. Grandma squeezed my hand. Delayed, perhaps, but justice nonetheless. The kind that leaves a lasting impression. I don't understand. You don't need to understand everything yet. Just trust the process. She leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking more tired, the adrenaline of the call fading. I just need you to do one thing for me. Anything. Come to the party, dress nicely, wear that navy dress I like, and bring your patience. The kind of stoic patience I taught you when you were 7 and learning Chopin and wanted to throw the sheet music across the music room. I almost laughed despite everything, the memory of her stern but loving guidance warming the cold room. That bad or that good? Her expression softened. Both. Necessary and unforgettable. Your father and mother need to learn that actions have consequences that can't be settled with a polite apology. And I've spent 5 years making sure that when the lesson finally came, it would be absolute. 5 years. She'd been planning something for 5 years. Grandma, what did you do? She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally winning out over her indomitable will. I protected you, sweetheart, the way I should have protected you all along. I'm only sorry I let my maternal hope delay the inevitable for so long. I sat with her until she fell asleep, my mind spinning with questions about Hal Sterling, the Sunday party, and the house I'd grown up in. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a prestigious law office in a restored brownstone on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Hal Sterling was nothing like the corporate sharks my father usually associated with. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, his movements slow but precise like a master watchmaker. His office smelled of old leather, expensive tobacco, and paper, lined floor to ceiling with bound legal volumes that looked like they held the secrets of the city. "Ava Thompson," he extended his hand. "Your grandmother speaks of you constantly. She says you have the soul of a musician and the backbone of a Whitmore. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Mr. Sterling, Hal, please." He gestured to a deep mahogany chair across from his desk. "Sit. Your grandmother asked me to explain a few things before Sunday. She wants you to be prepared for the fallout." I sat, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted my purse. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman," Hal began, opening a thick manila folder. "She's also far more astute than her children give her credit for. She's been observing, recording, and planning." Planning what exactly? He folded his hands on the desk, his gaze piercing. "Tell me, Ava, do you know who owns the house your parents live in?" "They do. Grandma gave it to them when Grandpa died. Everyone knows that." Hal's expression didn't change. "Is that the narrative they've been selling you?" "It's what my father says at every Thanksgiving." "Well, the public record says otherwise." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. "Look for yourself." I stared at the document in front of me, a certified property deed for the Thompson estate. Eleanor Whitmore's name was there, clear as day. No transfer of title, no deed of gift, no amendment. "They've been living in her house for 10 years. I said slowly, the weight of the revelation hitting me like a physical blow. "Thinking it was theirs." "Precisely," Hal said. "They've built their entire social standing on a foundation of borrowed sand." My head was spinning as I looked at the legal seal on the document. "But why would Grandma let them believe?" "Because she was watching, Ava. She wanted to see if her son would prove her fears wrong. She wanted to see if, given the privilege of that home, he would act with integrity or entitlement. Unfortunately, he did exactly what she expected. He treated her generosity as a weakness to be exploited." That night, I returned to my apartment and began searching through the storage bins in the back of my closet. Grandma had given me a box of old belongings years ago. Photographs, letters, and dried flowers from her 50th anniversary garden. I'd never looked through it carefully. It felt too intimate, like reading someone's diary without permission. But now I needed answers. I found it near the bottom, beneath a stack of faded concert programs. A sealed envelope yellowed with age, my name written in Grandma's elegant cursive script. Beneath it, 6 words. "For Ava, when you need to understand." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a copy of a legal document. The header was partially obscured, but I could see Grandma's signature at the bottom, dated 5 years ago, and in her handwriting, a note clipped to the corner. The house never left my hand, sweetheart. It was only borrowed, and some borrowers don't deserve the privilege of the roof over their heads. I read it 3 times, the cold realization settling in my gut. Sunday's party was being held at Grandma's house, the same house my parents treated as their own personal kingdom, the place where they'd hosted extravagant dinner parties, where they'd liquidated the piano that sat in the living room like it belonged to them. But it was all a house of cards. My father had built his entire sense of Ivy League status on a foundation that didn't exist. I thought about all the times he'd lectured me about real assets and smart investments while standing in a home he didn't actually own. The irony was poetic and devastating. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and set it on my nightstand. Sunday was 3 days away. Whatever Grandma had planned, it was going to be a reckoning in the very heart of their territory. And they had no idea the storm was already at the door. Sunday arrived with a kind of sharp, biting Philadelphia winter sunlight that makes every crack in the pavement visible. Grandma's house, or rather, the prestigious estate my parents had squatted in for a decade, looked deceptively festive. Someone had hung a gaudy Happy 60th Birthday banner across the stately white pillars of the front porch. Luxury cars lined the cobblestone driveway and spilled onto the manicured suburban street. I parked my modest sedan at the far end of the block and sat in my car for a moment, taking deep, steadying breaths of the frigid air. I'd chosen a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, with the vintage pearl earrings that Grandma Evelyn had given me for my 21st birthday. They felt like cold anchors against my skin. My hair was pinned back neatly, armor for a battle I didn't fully understand, but was finally ready to fight. Inside the house buzzed with about 30 guests, the usual power brokers from the local country club, aunts and uncles I saw only at obligatory holidays, neighbors from the old days, and a handful of my father's most influential business associates. I recognized Mr. Harrison near the fireplace, his posture rigid and expensive. Madison was standing beside him with Daniel on her arm, looking every bit the pampered socialite in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The living room drew my eye immediately. The corner where the Steinway had stood for 30 years was empty. Someone had placed a large, overpriced potted plant there, an organic bandage trying to fill the void. It looked ridiculous. A leafy green apology for a crime against art and family legacy. My mother stood near the dining table in a blood-red designer dress, accepting compliments like a queen receiving tribute from her loyal subjects. My father hovered nearby, nursing a glass of premium bourbon and working the room with the oily charm of a career politician. And in the far corner, almost invisible among the crowd, sat Hal Sterling. His battered leather briefcase rested beside his chair like a silent weapon waiting to be drawn. He caught my eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My Aunt Margaret, Grandma's younger sister, appeared beside me. "Ava, sweetheart, how is Evelyn really?" "Tired," I said honestly. "But her mind is still a steel trap." Aunt Margaret's eyes drifted to the empty corner. I noticed the piano's gone. Rich said Evelyn wanted to liquidate it to fund a new family investment. I opened my mouth to respond, but my father's voice cut through the crowd. Everyone, if I could have your attention, please. My father stood in the center of the living room, his baccarat crystal glass raised, commanding the space like he owned it, which I now knew was the most elaborate lie of his life. Today, we celebrate 60 wonderful years of Diane Thompson. The room erupted in practiced applause. My mother beamed, her eyes crinkling with a performance of pure joy. And I also want to take a moment to share some exciting family news. My stomach dropped into my shoes. As some of you know, our daughter Madison has been seeing Daniel Harrison, son of my dear friend and partner James. He gestured toward Daniel, who smiled politely. And to celebrate her bright future, we have a special surprise. He led the entire party outside into the crisp afternoon, where a gleaming silver Mercedes-Benz sat in a driveway, a massive red bow perched on its hood. A gift, my father announced proudly, made possible by Grandma Evelyn's generosity. She sold her antique piano to ensure her granddaughter's entry into the next chapter of her life with the status she deserves. Madison squealed, threw her arms around my father, and posed for photos beside the car, as if she were at a red carpet premiere. I stood frozen on the porch, the sheer hypocrisy of the moment making my bile rise. He was doing it again, rewriting the story, making himself the hero while erasing Grandma's wishes entirely. A woman I didn't recognize leaned toward her husband. Wasn't that piano supposed to go to the other granddaughter, the music teacher? Her husband shrugged. I guess in this family, plans changed. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me, her face pale with a sudden sharp clarity. Ava, did Evelyn really agree to this? Before I could answer, Madison spotted me and called out, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that causes cavities. Ava, come take a picture. Don't be jealous. I'm sure Grandma will leave you something too. Maybe her collection of dusty old sheet music. Scattered laughter from the crowd rippled through the cold air. My hands were shaking with a cold, focused fury. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. And then behind me, I heard the distinct, heavy click of a briefcase opening. Everyone began filing back inside, but Aunt Margaret blocked my father's path. Rich. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. I need to ask you something. My father's smile didn't waver, though his eyes turned cold as flint. Can it wait, Margaret? We're in the middle of... Did you ask Evelyn before you sold that piano? The question landed like a heavy stone in still water. Conversations nearby stuttered to a halt. Mother is in hospice, my father said smoothly, using his most condescending executive voice. She's not in a condition to make these kinds of decisions. We did what was best for her long-term care and the family's standing. I spoke with her this morning. Aunt Margaret's voice grew stronger, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. She's clear-headed, Rich, completely lucid. And she told me you never asked her permission. You never even told her. More people were listening now. I saw Mr. Harrison frown, saw Daniel shift uncomfortably. My mother pushed forward, face flushed with too much Chardonnay and rising rage. Margaret, this is my birthday. Let's not make a scene. A scene? Aunt Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. Diane, Your husband sold Evelyn's most precious possession without her knowledge and used the money for a car to impress a business partner. If anyone's making a scene, it's not me." The room had gone quiet. 30 pairs of eyes ping-ponged between my aunt and my parents. My father's composure cracked just slightly. "This is a family matter. It doesn't need to be discussed in public." "Actually," a new voice said from behind us, cutting through the tension like a surgical scalpel, "I think public is exactly where it needs to be discussed." I turned. Hal Sterling was standing now, his briefcase open, a folder of notarized documents in his hand. He walked toward the center of the room with the calm authority of a man who had dismantled much larger empires than this one. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hal Sterling. I'm Eleanor Whitmore's attorney." My father's face went white, ashen like he'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. The silence was suffocating. Hal positioned himself near the empty corner where the piano used to stand, a choice that felt calculated and deliberate. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "But Eleanor Whitmore has asked me to address some urgent matters regarding her estate and the unauthorized liquidation of her assets. Given the circumstances, she felt it was important that her family and those close to them hear this directly to ensure there are no further misunderstandings." My father found his voice first. "My mother has an attorney. Since when?" "Since 30 years ago, Rich." Hal's tone was polite, but cutting as a diamond. "I also represented your father. You would know this if you'd ever bothered to ask about her affairs, instead of just waiting for them to become yours." Muffled gasps. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God, this is social suicide." My mother stepped forward. "Evelyn is dying. She's not in her right mind. Whatever papers you have, Mr. Sterling." Hal raised a hand, silencing her with a single sharp gesture. "I visited Evelyn this morning. Her nurse, Carol, can confirm she is fully competent and lucid. She dictated specific instructions for today's meeting." He opened the folder and removed a document. "Now, I understand there's been some confusion about property ownership, so let me clarify." He held up the paper high enough for the light to catch the official seal. "This is the deed to the house we are currently standing in." I watched my father's face drain of color, looking like he was about to collapse onto the Persian rug. "Notice the name on the deed. Eleanor Whitmore, not Rich Thompson, not Diane Thompson." Hal paused, letting the words sink in like lead. "This house has never been transferred. It was never gifted. Your parents have been living here rent-free for 10 years at Evelyn's generosity. Nothing more." The room erupted in whispers. My father grabbed the edge of a chair, steadying himself as if the ground beneath him had just liquefied. Madison stared at her father, confusion and panic warring on her face. And Hal Sterling wasn't done. "That," he said, "just the opening act." If you're still here, I'm guessing you're holding your breath the same way I was in that moment. Before I tell you what Hal revealed next, I want to ask you something. Who do you think actually owns that house? A, my parents, because surely Grandma must have transferred it at some point. B, Grandma, because there's been a secret all along. C, me, because the biggest twist is yet to come. Drop your answer in the comments, then keep watching to find out. My father's voice cracked. This is impossible. Mother said the house was ours. She promised. She promised you could live here. Hal set the deed on the dining table where everyone could see it. She never promised ownership. There's a significant legal difference, Mr. Thompson, one that an executive should have understood. I watched the realization spread through the room like wildfire. Mr. Harrison took a small step back from my father, a literal distancing of himself from a sinking ship. For 10 years, Hal continued, you've enjoyed this property without paying rent, utilities, or property taxes, all covered by Evelyn's accounts. You've treated it as your own. You've even made unauthorized modifications without permission. He glanced at the gaudy modern light fixtures my mother had installed last year. Legally, you are tenants at will, and the property owner has the right to terminate that arrangement at any time. You can't be serious. My mother's voice was shrill, reaching a frequency of pure desperation. We've lived here for a decade. We've invested in this house. Invested without authorization. Hal's expression didn't change. Any improvements you've made without written consent belong to the property owner, Eleanor Whitmore. Madison grabbed Daniel's arm, her knuckles white. This is insane. Dad, tell them this is some kind of joke. My father couldn't speak. He was staring at the deed like it was a death warrant. I should also mention, Hal added almost casually, that Pennsylvania law takes property fraud quite seriously. Representing someone else's property as your own, particularly in business contexts, can have significant legal consequences. I saw Mr. Harrison's expression shift from confusion to cold calculation. He was looking at my father differently now, not as a partner, but as a liability. The empire my father had built on borrowed prestige was crumbling before our eyes, and Hal still had more documents in his folder. Now, Hal said, pulling out a second document, we come to the matter of the trust. What trust? My father's voice was barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, Eleanor Whitmore established a separate trust independent of the will that was shared with your family. This trust was created specifically to protect her most valuable assets in the event of, he paused delicately, financial and ethical misconduct. Financial misconduct? My mother sputtered. We're her family! Family members can still commit misconduct, Mrs. Thompson, as recent events have demonstrated. Hal withdrew a thick document, its pages crisp and official-looking. Per the terms of this trust, the following assets are irrevocably assigned to a single beneficiary: the property we're standing in, Evelyn's financial accounts, and all items of sentimental value, including the 1892 Steinway piano that was recently sold without authorization. He looked up, and his gaze settled directly on me. The sole beneficiary is Ava Rose Thompson. The room went silent. Madison's shrill shriek broke it. What? This is total fraud, my father shouted. She was manipulated. That little... He pointed at me, face contorted with the kind of rage that usually precedes a corporate lawsuit. Rich. Hal's voice turned to ice. I would advise you to choose your next words very carefully. Everything said here today has been witnessed by over 30 people and is being legally recorded. Aunt Margaret moved to stand beside me. Her hand found mine and squeezed. Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing, Hal continued. She spent 5 years watching, waiting, hoping her son would prove her wrong. Instead, He sold her most treasured possession to buy a car for the granddaughter who never visits her. Actions have consequences, Mr. Thompson. This is yours. Regarding the piano sale, Hal pulled out another notarized document. Since the Steinway was an irrevocable asset of the trust, and Ava is the designated beneficiary, the sale conducted without the trustee's consent, that's Eleanor, constitutes unauthorized disposal of trust assets. What does that mean? Madison's voice was small. Her social media influencer confidence completely evaporated. It means the $95,000 must be returned to the trust within 30 days. Hal's gaze swept across my parents and sister like a cold front moving in from the Atlantic. Failure to comply will result in immediate civil litigation for misappropriation of trust property. Given the digital paper trail from the Mercedes dealership, I assure you the outcome would not be favorable for your family in any court in Pennsylvania. My father laughed, a hollow, desperate sound that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. We don't have 95,000 sitting around in liquid cash. The money went straight to the car. Then I suggest you find a way to liquidate that asset immediately. Hal nodded toward the window where the Mercedes was still visible in the driveway, its silver paint gleaming mockingly in the winter sun. The dealer might accept a return, though you'll likely take a 5-figure loss the moment you drove it off the lot. Madison burst into tears, the kind of ugly crying that ruins a designer makeup job. My car? You're taking my car? I'm not taking anything, Miss Thompson. I'm simply explaining the legal and financial consequences of your family's choices. I watched Madison look to Daniel for support, but he had already stepped away from her, his expression a mask of careful, neutral professionalism. His father was whispering something urgent in his ear, and neither of them looked even remotely sympathetic. In their world, being connected to a scandal was worse than being poor. Additionally, Hal added, Eleanor has asked me to inform you that your living arrangement in this house will be formally restructured. You may continue to reside here temporarily, but a proper market rate lease agreement will be required. A lease? My mother's voice was barely audible. Her queen of the suburbs persona shattered. In the house we've lived in for 10 years? In the house, Hal corrected gently, that you never legally owned. The room had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was on me, some with pity, some with newfound respect, and others with pure, unadulterated venom. My father turned slowly, his face twisted with the kind of betrayal and fury usually reserved for a backstabbing business rival. You did this. You poisoned her against us, didn't you, Ava? I stood my ground, feeling the weight of the pearl earrings against my jaw. No, Dad. I didn't do anything. My voice was steadier than I expected, ringing with a clarity that silenced the room. Grandma Evelyn made these decisions 5 years ago, long before I even knew the value of an inheritance. I only found out this week that she was protecting me from you. Liar! My mother's voice shook with pure venom. You've always been jealous of Madison, of our family's success. This is your petty revenge. Revenge? I felt something cold and hard crystallize inside me, a sudden steel in my spine. I didn't sell Grandma's piano without asking her. I didn't spend the money on a luxury SUV for myself. I didn't lie to everyone at the country club about what happened. I stepped forward, looking directly at my mother, not as her daughter, but as her landlord. I'm not the one who said, "At least she's useful for something," when I agreed to visit Grandma every day. I'm not the one who hung up on me when I asked hard questions. And I'm not the one who threatened me, saying I'd be responsible for killing Grandma if I told her the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Aunt Margaret's hand tightened on mine. I spent 28 years being invisible in this family. My voice didn't waver. I accepted it because I thought that that's what love required, shrinking yourself to make others comfortable in their own arrogance. I looked at my father, at my mother, at Madison still crying over her doomed Mercedes. But Grandma taught me something different. She taught me that loving yourself means standing up for what's right, even when it costs you the only family you've ever known. I took a breath, the air in the room finally feeling clean. So here's what I want you to understand. I'm not apologizing anymore. I'm not staying silent anymore. And I'm done pretending everything is fine just to keep your perfect image intact. The room was absolutely still. After the crowd began to disperse slowly, awkwardly, with whispered goodbyes and avoided eye contact, the kind of social exodus that ruins a family's reputation for a generation, Hal pulled me aside. "Ava, we need to discuss next steps regarding the eviction process." I nodded, still feeling surreal, like I was watching myself in a high-stakes indie film. "Legally, you have several options." He spoke quietly so only I could hear. "You could demand immediate eviction. Given the circumstances and the breach of trust, your grandmother would support whatever you decide." I looked across the room at my parents. My father had collapsed into a chair, head in his hands. My mother stood frozen by the window, the mascara streaking down her face in dark, permanent-looking lines. Madison had disappeared, probably outside mourning her short-lived luxury. They looked broken. Part of me, a small, wounded part that remembered every missed birthday and every cold comment, wanted to twist the knife, to make them feel every ounce of the pain they'd caused me over 28 years. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. "I don't want to throw them out," I said slowly. "Not immediately." Hal raised an eyebrow, his legal mind already calculating the risks. "Are you certain?" "Yes." I took a breath. "Here's what I want. The $95,000 gets returned within 90 days, not 30. I'll give them time to sell the car and find a bridge loan. They can stay in the house with a formal lease agreement at a minimal rent. After Grandma," I swallowed hard, the reality of the loss hitting me. "After she passes, they'll have 12 months to find somewhere else to live." "That's remarkably generous given everything, Ava." "Maybe." I met his eyes. "But I'm not doing this to punish them. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I refuse to become a carbon copy of the people who raised me." Hal studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, a hint of genuine respect in his expression. "Your grandmother said you'd respond this way. She's very proud of you, Ava." "I know." My voice cracked. I know she is. The agreement was drafted right there on the dining room table, witnessed by Aunt Margaret and two of the remaining guests who were too stunned to leave. My father signed without looking at me. My mother's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the Mont Blanc pen. Neither of them said a word. By the time the last signature was in place, the house had emptied. Mr. Harrison and Daniel had left without saying goodbye. The business deal and the engagement effectively terminated. Aunt Margaret hugged me tight before leaving. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Evelyn would be so proud." "She is proud," I said softly. "I talked to her this morning." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A video call request from Grandma's hospice number. I answered, walking to the empty corner of the living room where the piano used to be. Her face appeared on screen, pale but peaceful. "My brave girl." Grandma's voice was weak but warm, like a fading ember. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, "and relieved and sad all at once." "That's how courage feels, sweetheart. It's never comfortable." I didn't throw them out. I gave them time. "I know." Hal texted me. Her eyes glistened with a final, fierce pride. "You're a better person than they deserve, Ava. But that's why I chose you. You're the only one who can carry this legacy without letting it rot." I pressed my hand against the screen, wishing I could hold her hand instead. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. For protecting me." "Don't thank me." She smiled, but it was tinged with a century's worth of sorrow. "Just live well. Play music. Be happy. That's how you thank me." "I will." "I know you will, sweetheart." She closed her eyes. "I've always known." Grandma Evelyn passed away that evening, peacefully, with my hand in hers as a soft rain fell over the city. The funeral was held 5 days later. Per her wishes, it was simple. No extravagant flowers, no ostentatious displays, just music, memories, and the people who truly loved her. I played the piano during the service, not the Steinway that was gone, but a modest upright that the church had owned for decades. I played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece Grandma ever taught me. My parents sat in the back. They didn't approach me. My mother wore dark sunglasses that hid her eyes. My father stared straight ahead like a man attending his own social sentencing. Madison wasn't there at all. "Too emotionally fragile," my mother explained to someone. 6 months later, I moved into Grandma's house. It felt strange at first, walking through rooms filled with her presence, sleeping in the guest bedroom I'd known since childhood. But slowly, it began to feel like home. I used part of the returned money to buy a new piano, not a Steinway, those cost a fortune, but a beautiful Yamaha Grand that filled the corner where Grandma's piano had once stood. Different, but meaningful. A new beginning. I started teaching private lessons on weekends. My parents moved out 2 months after Grandma's death. They bought a small condo across town, their world scaled down to fit their new reality. We didn't speak. Not out of anger exactly, just the vast, cold distance of lost trust. 8 months after the funeral, my phone rang. Madison. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Ava. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. I've started going to therapy, she said finally. Turns out being the favorite wasn't actually a gift. It's a trap. I'm glad you're working through it, I said. I'm not asking you to forgive me, her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. We sat in silence for a moment. If you ever want to talk, I said slowly, I'm willing to listen. But trust takes time to rebuild. I understand. We hung up without saying goodbye. Some doors, once closed, open slowly. It's spring now. I sit at my piano as the sun sets over the garden. I play Grandma's favorite nocturne, the notes drifting through the house, filling the silence with something softer. I think about everything that's happened, the betrayal, the reveal, the boundaries I never thought I'd have the courage to set. I don't hate my parents. Hate takes too much energy. But I don't need them anymore either. And that's a kind of freedom I never expected to find. I look at Grandma's photograph on the piano. I'm doing okay, Grandma, I whisper. I close the piano lid, stand, and walk to the window. I don't have the original piano. I don't have the family I thought I had. But I have something better. I have myself. I have boundaries. And I have a life built on truth instead of silence. And that's the real inheritance Grandma left me. And that's my story. Thank you for staying until the end.